The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the wooden shutter of the Robinson farmhouse in rural Kentucky. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the glass pane of the kitchen windows. Claire Robinson pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stirred the pot of soup on the stove. Outside, the rain was relentless, pouring down in sheets that made the world beyond the porch invisible. Matthew Robinson sat near the fire, flipping through a tattered gardening magazine without reading a word. His eyes flicked toward the clock. It was nearly midnight. "Storm's getting worse," he muttered. Claire nodded. This one came out of nowhere.
They had lived in this farmhouse for over 15 years. It sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by wheat fields and woods. It was quiet, secluded, the kind of place that felt untouched by the outside world. But tonight, there was a sense of unease, as if the storm had brought something with it. Just as Claire was about to serve dinner, a faint sound rose above the storm, a sharp, distant wail. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal either. It was human. It was unmistakably the cry of a baby. Claire froze, the ladle suspended in mid-air. "Did you hear that?" Matthew put down his magazine and stood. "I thought it was the wind." "No," she said firmly, heading to the door. "That was a baby." They opened the door, and a gust of cold rain-laden air slammed into their faces. Claire squinted through the sheets of water, her heart racing. Then she saw it, a large wicker basket sitting at the edge of the porch, covered in a soaked flannel blanket. Matthew rushed forward and pulled back the blanket. His breath caught in his throat. There were babies. Not one. Not two. But three. 3 tiny newborns, bundled in damp cloth, their faces flushed from crying and cold. One had a tuft of dark hair, another had almost none, and the third wore a knitted cap. Their cries were weak now, hoarse, as though they had been crying for hours. Claire gasped and dropped to her knees beside them. "Oh my God." Matthew scanned the area but saw no sign of anyone in the storm. Whoever had left them was gone. He reached into the basket and found a small envelope, soggy but intact. Inside was a hastily scrawled note. "Please save them. We can't. They are blind. But they deserve to live." Claire covered her mouth with her hand. "They're blind." She looked down at the infants. Even in the dim porch light, it was clear, their eyes didn't focus. They didn't blink at the sudden light, didn't track movement or sound. Matthew stood still for a long moment, then turned to his wife. "What do we do?" Claire didn't hesitate. "Bring them in." They brought the basket inside and wrapped the babies in dry towels. Claire turned up the heater while Matthew started boiling water for formula. There was no discussion, no plan. Juste instinct. Once warm and fed, the babies stopped crying and drifted into uneasy sleep, nestled on the couch beside the fire. Claire sat next to them, her hand resting lightly on the smallest one's chest, feeling the rise and fall of fragile breath. "They're so tiny," she whispered.
"And perfect." Matthew sat down slowly, staring into the fire.
The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling of wood and the ticking of the old clock. "We should call someone," he finally said. Claire looked at him. "Call who?"
"The sheriff. Child service."
"I mean, we can't just keep them." Her eyes never left the babies. "And if we do that, what happens to them?"
"You know what the system is like. 3 blind babies?"
"They'll be separated. Put in homes, institutions."
Matthew sighed.
He knew she was right. "We're not young, Claire. We don't have experience with this."
"No, we don't.
But we have love." He looked at her then, really looked. He saw the same fierce determination in her eyes that he had seen the day she fought for their marriage, the day they learned she couldn't have children, the day she buried the only pregnancy they ever had. He knew that look. It meant she had already made up her mind. "They'll need names," she said softly, brushing a hand over one baby's head. He smiled faintly.
"You're serious."
"I've never been more." They sat together through the night, naming the children as the storm slowly began to pass. The boy they named Noah, after the man who weathered a great flood. The girl with the knitted cap became Lily, for the flower that grows even in shadows. The smallest, the one who clung to Claire's finger with unexpected strength, was Hope. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The clouds lifted, revealing a soft morning light. The storm was gone, but its mark had been left behind, not in broken trees or flooded roads, but in 3 sleeping infants who had changed 2 lives forever.
Claire roquait gently, tir the sleeping down her cheek.
They came to the right door, she whispered. Matthew put his arm around her and looked out at the horizon. And for the first time in years, the farmhouse didn't feel empty. It felt like home. The days that followed were a whirlwind of exhaustion, discovery, and small, sacred moments. Matthew took time off from the hardware store he managed in town, and Claire put aside her freelance writing. Every waking hour, and there were many, was spent tending to the 3 tiny souls who had landed at their doorstep. The farmhouse, once quiet and somber, now echoed with soft cries, lullabies, and the rustling of hurried footsteps. Feeding alone was a challenge. Noah took to formula quickly, but Lily gagged often, and Hope's appetite fluctuated unpredictably. Claire meticulously tracked feeding times, ounces consumed, and dirty diapers in a spiral notebook. She had never been so organized in her life, nor so tired. But it wasn't just the demands of infant care that wore on them, it was the looming unknown. Doctors confirmed what the note had suggested. All 3 babies were born blind.
No light perception.
No potential for correction. Congenital anophthalmia, the pediatric ophthalmologist had said after a series of tests. Their eyes didn't develop fully in utero. Claire had clutched the edge of her chair, willing herself not to cry in front of the doctor. Matthew, who rarely showed emotion, sat unusually still. What does that mean for their future? Claire asked. They'll need mobility training, sensory integration therapy, speech and cognitive development support.
It's a journée.
But with love, early intervention, and consistency, they can thrive. They're not broken. Just different. Not broken, Claire repeated later in the car. She said it aloud as if she needed to hear it over and over. They're not broken. At home, they began learning everything they could.
Braille basique. Tactile toys.
How to help babies navigate space without sight. They added wind chimes to the hallway, soft bells above the crib, and textured rugs in each room. The kitchen cabinet knobs got labeled with bump dots. The bathroom lights now clicked audibly. The farmhouse transformed into an adaptive environment. But more than that, it became a living, breathing school of patience and tenderness.
Matthew, où 11 drided noix and clûtés, found comfort in the chaos.
He built a rocking chair ramp in the porch where Claire could sit with the babies during calm evenings. He read aloud from children's books even before the babies could comprehend the words. His low voice, steady and warm, often lulled all 3 to sleep. Claire developed a new rhythm. She hummed when changing diapers to signal what she was doing. She used specific scents, lavender for Lily's blanket, chamomile for Noah's, to help them begin distinguishing. And for Hope, who cried the most but smiled the quickest, she sang the same lullaby over and over.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine.
One morning, as Claire was burping Hope by the window, she noticed the baby's tiny hands fluttering with excitement whenever she spoke. It was subtle, but it was there, recognition. That was the moment Claire realized these children weren't living in a void. They were absorbing everything. They just needed to be taught differently. Neighbors, curious and concerned, began stopping by. Some brought baby clothes and casseroles. Others brought questions. They're blind? All 3? Asked Mrs. Halpert from next door. Claire nodded. Yes. Mrs. Halpert hesitated, her lips pressed into a tight line. That's a lot. It's a blessing, Claire replied simply. A few guests weren't so kind. One woman from church whispered, not so quietly, why would someone keep children like that? They're not going to have a normal life. Matthew, who overheard, didn't respond. But that night, he stayed up late carving 3 wooden name plaques, Noah, Lily, and Hope. He mounted them above each crib, then sat in the dark nursery, watching them breathe, listening to the night. They're ours, he whispered. And slowly, the town began to change. Word spread, not of tragedy, but of grace. People dropped their preconceptions, if only slightly, and began seeing the Robinsons as something more than a couple with blind children. They were seen as a family. One day, Pastor Mark from the local Methodist church stopped by. I heard what happened, he said, handing Claire a small bouquet. I can't pretend to understand the path you're on, but I know courage when I see it. Claire thanked him, then invited him in for tea. As they talked, she realized something profound. This wasn't just about raising children. This was about reframing an entire community's idea of worth, ability, and love. By the baby's first birthday, the farmhouse had become a sanctuary. The children had grown into curious toddlers. They crawled with ease, guided by sound and smell. Noah could already identify certain objects by touch.
Lily humide song in perfect pitch.
Hope, tiny but fierce, learned to pull herself to standing by gripping the living room sofa. Every step, every syllable, every new habit was a triumph. Claire kept a journal, not for herself, but for them. Today, Hope found her way to the back porch by following the wind chimes. I cried. Not because she made it, but because she knew she could try. The road ahead was still uncertain. But in the small moments, the first giggle, the first crawl, the way Lily tilted her head when music played, Claire and Matthew found the fuel to keep going. One evening, as they watched the children sleep, Matthew turned to Claire. I used to think a house needed light to feel full, he said. And now? Claire asked. He smiled. Now I know love makes its own light. Outside, fireflies danced in the tall grass, and the old porch light glowed softly, a beacon for anyone still searching for home. By the time Noah, Lily, and Hope turned 2, the Robinson farmhouse had transformed from a quiet retreat into a lively haven, bursting with the sounds of tiny feet, squeals of delight, and the occasional crash followed by either giggles or wails. Claire and Matthew had long abandoned any notions of a normal life. They were building a different kind of normal, one where success wasn't measured by milestones found in baby books, but by subtle triumphs. Lily navigating from the kitchen to the porch without bumping into a chair, Noah distinguishing a spoon from a fork by touch alone, or Hope recognizing Claire's perfume from across the room and toddling straight toward her outstretched arms. The days were full and demanding, but also rich with joy. Each child had already begun to carve out their own space in the world, even if that world was mostly made up of the rooms and hallways of the farmhouse. Noah, ever the observer, loved to sit near the window seat, fingers trailing over the grooves of wooden toys Matthew carved for him. He was calm, contemplative, and precise. Claire often found him turning objects over and over in his hands, his brows furrowed in deep, silent study. Lily was gentler in movement but curious in mind. She would lie on the living room floor for hours, listening to music, classical lullabies, even the ticking of the grandfather clock, then hum back melodies with uncanny accuracy. She rarely spoke unless she had something purposeful to say, but when she did, her words were soft and poetic. Hope, the youngest, was a tempest. What she lacked in size she made up for in spirit. She was the first to crawl, the first to stand, and the first to throw a tantrum. She had a laugh that burst from her belly and a stubbornness that often left Claire breathless. But she was also fiercely affectionate, often clinging to Matthew's neck like a barnacle during bedtime. One afternoon, as Claire folded laundry in the sunroom, she overheard a conversation through the baby monitor.
Lily, Noah, what color is the sky? Noah, I don't know.
I think cold.
Hope, sky smell like rain.
Claire stopped folding. There it was, their world. Not built on images, but on texture, temperature, sound and scent. The sky wasn't blue. It was cold. It was the smell of rain. It was the distant rumble of thunder or the warmth of sunlight pressing against skin. They weren't just surviving without sight, they were redefining what it meant to see. In the evenings, Matthew would take Noah out to the porch and guide his fingers along the leaves of the apple tree, letting him feel the smooth surface of a budding fruit, the brittle crack of a fallen branch. Claire would sit on the floor with Lily, placing instruments in her lap, a tambourine, a triangle, a small child-sized keyboard. Hope preferred movement. She would chase the scent of baking bread through the house, arms outstretched, laughing when she found the source. The Robinsons didn't own a television. Instead, they filled their home with audiobooks, records, and stories. Each night, bedtime was a ritual. Matthew would settle into the old rocking chair and recite folk tales from memory, while the children curled up on a rug at his feet. One night, Claire told them the story of how they came to the house. You were brought to us by the storm, she said. The rain was heavy, the wind wild, but there you were, 3 tiny hearts, wrapped in blankets, waiting at our door. Lily whispered, the storm brought us home. Hope asked, was the sky cold then? Claire smiled. Very cold. But the moment I held you, everything felt warm. As the years passed, milestones came and went in quiet, steady waves. The children learned to feed themselves, though messily at first. They memorized the layout of every room, every corner, every threshold. Matthew installed tactile tiles in the hallways so they could feel where they were with their feet. Claire began labeling objects in Braille, even though formal reading was still a few years away. They weren't isolated. Once a week, a mobility specialist named Rachel drove down from Lexington to work with them. She taught them how to orient themselves using sound, how to trail their fingers along walls, and eventually, how to use small training canes. Rachel was patient and warm, and the children adored her. After each session, she would sit with Claire and Matthew in the kitchen and say, "They're not just adapting. They're thriving." Outside their home, the community remained cautiously kind. The townsfolk had grown used to the idea of the Robinson children. Some even asked about them in the grocery store or brought tactile books from the library as gifts. But there were still sideways glances, still whispered questions about what kind of future 3 blind children could possibly have. Matthew learned to let the stares slide off his back. Claire, however, sometimes bristled. "They think they're being polite," she told Matthew one night. "But what they really want to ask is, why didn't you give them away?" He took her hand.
"Because we're the lucky ones."
"Not them. Us." On the children's 3rd birthday, Claire baked 3 small cakes, 1 vanilla, 1 chocolate, and 1 strawberry, and let each child decorate their own with sprinkles and frosting. The kitchen ended up looking like a tornado had blown through it, but their laughter was so loud and unfiltered that neither parent minded the mess. That night, as the sun dipped below the Kentucky hills and the crickets began their nightly chorus, Claire stood on the porch, listening to her children play in the yard. They didn't see the fireflies, but they chased the sounds of wings. They didn't watch the sunset, but they felt the warmth leave the air. They didn't follow the light. They created it. The morning Claire and Matthew decided to start the adoption process, the fog hung thick over the fields, casting a silver hush across the farmhouse. It was a quiet, still day, the kind of day when nothing moved unless you asked it to. But inside their kitchen, everything felt urgent. "They're 3 years old, Matt," Claire said, her voice low but certain. "It's time. They need legal names. Protection. Stability. We love them, that's never been in question. But we need the law to see what we already know." Matthew sipped his coffee in silence. The idea had been circling their minds for months, but now it had a weight, a deadline. The children were growing. Questions would come. Sooner or later, someone would challenge their right to keep them. The problem was paperwork. They had none. No birth certificates, no hospital records, no legal trace of the night those babies arrived on their porch. Just a handwritten note, barely legible, stained with water and time. "Do you think we can prove anything?" Matthew asked. Claire reached for a folder she had been building quietly over the years. In it were medical reports, pediatric evaluations, developmental logs, photographs, and journals. "We can't prove where they came from," she said. "But we can prove where they belong." They contacted the county's Department of Child Services. The receptionist transferred their call twice before they spoke to a caseworker named Emily Walsh. "You found them?" Emily asked, her tone equal parts confusion and disbelief. "We didn't find them. They were left on our doorstep," Claire clarified. There was a pause. 3 blind infants, all together, and no record of anyone ever looking for them?
Emily said slowly.
"That's highly unusual." "We know," Matthew replied. "But they're our children now." A week later, Emily arrived at the farmhouse. She was younger than they expected, maybe early 30s, with a messy bun, oversized glasses, and a firm handshake. She walked through the house, asking questions, noting the adaptive tools, the safety modifications, the organization of everything from toys to toiletries. "They're clearly loved," she said. "And you've done a phenomenal job. But without any legal abandonment report, it's going to be a challenge." Claire's voice wavered. "We'll do whatever it takes." Emily paused.
"May meet the children."
Noah, Lily, and Hope were in the living room, huddled around a speaker playing an audiobook. When Emily entered, they looked up with their ears, not their eyes. Hope was the first to speak.
"You're new."
Emily smiled. "I am." Noah extended a cautious hand. "I'm Noah." This is my family. Lily, as always, was quietest. But when Emily kneeled beside her and asked what she liked best about her home, Lily said softly, "Everything smells like warmth here." After Emily left, she called her supervisor. "There's no abuse, no neglect. Quite the opposite. These kids are thriving." "But no legal documentation," her supervisor reminded her. "I'll find another way." Emily began digging through archives, hospital birth logs, police reports, anything that might hint at a triple abandonment case. After weeks of research, she came up empty. Until one afternoon, she stumbled on a single paragraph buried in a local newspaper's police blotter from 4 years prior. Suspicious activity reported at 1409 Brookhaven Lane. Caller reported a car idling at midnight during a thunderstorm.
Véhicule gone upon patrol arrival.
No incident filed. The address was 2 blocks from the Robinson farmhouse. She called Claire immediately. "We have enough," Emily said. "It's not a clear origin, but it establishes that something happened that night." "Is that really all it takes?" Claire asked. "No. But sometimes, a community can help build a bridge where the law can't." Emily reached out to her friend who worked at the local newspaper and proposed a story. A couple in rural Kentucky raises 3 blind children abandoned during a storm. It wasn't a plea for sympathy, but a story of resilience.
The headline read: Stormborn. How 3 children found the light without sight.
The story spread faster than any of them expected. Local news picked it up. Then state media. Then a national morning show requested an interview. Claire declined the big interviews. She didn't want to turn her family into a spectacle. But she agreed to speak at a town hall meeting, where she stood in front of neighbors and strangers and said, "We didn't rescue them. They rescued us. They taught us how to see without eyes, how to love without limits, how to listen without judgment. We didn't birth them, but we've been reborn because of them." The applause was thunderous. When the crowd dispersed, a woman approached quietly. She was in her 60s, with pale eyes and trembling hands. She pressed an envelope into Claire's hand. "I was a nurse once," she whispered. "There were 3 babies years ago. Born at a clinic that was shut down. No papers.
No record.
No one wanted them.
He never forgo. When he read your story.
I think they're yours." Inside the envelope was a copy of an old intake log handwritten. No names, no birth dates, just 3 entries marked infant, with visual anomaly suspected written beside each. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough. With Emily's help and the testimony of neighbors, doctors, and even the former nurse, Claire and Matthew petitioned the court for legal adoption under special circumstances. It took 6 months. On a cold morning in February, Judge Albright signed the final decree. Claire wept when she read it. The court recognizes Noah, Lily, and Hope Robinson as the legal children of Claire and Matthew Robinson. May this bond reflect what the heart has always known. They threw a party that night. Nothing fancy, just balloons, cake, and laughter. And for the first time, Claire tucked the children in and whispered,
"You are ours."
Always. Even on paper. By the time the children turned 6, the questions began. It started innocently, during a quiet afternoon in early spring. Claire was brushing Hope's hair on the porch while the other 2 played with a set of musical blocks nearby.
The wind carried the song of blooming lilac from the garden, and birdsong filled the air like a lullaby.
Hope, ever blunt and curious, tilted her head and asked, "Mom, why can't I see like you?" Claire's hands froze in mid-brush. Her heart stuttered. They had always used gentle language, words like different, special, unique. But now, it was clear that euphemisms would no longer suffice. She placed the brush down slowly. "Because you were born that way, sweetheart."
Your eyes don't work like mine do.
"But why?" Hope asked, turning her face toward Claire. "Did I break them?" Claire pulled her daughter into her lap and held her close. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Some people are born with eyes that don't see. Just like some are born with hair that's curly, or a voice that sings. Do you wish I could see?" Claire swallowed the sudden tightness in her throat. "No. I wish the world would see you for who you are.
You are perfect to me."
That night, after the children were asleep, Claire sat on the porch swing, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Matthew joined her, a steaming mug of chamomile tea in his hand. She asked why she's blind, Claire said softly. And I told her the truth. Or part of it.
Matthew exhaled.
It was bound to come. They're getting older. Smarter. They'll want to know more soon, where they came from, who left them. Why? Matthew nodded. We need to be ready to answer. All of it. And just as they feared, the questions didn't stop. A week later, Noah asked over breakfast, do we have a real mom and dad? Claire looked up from buttering toast.
What do you mean, sweetheart?
I mean, you're real. But someone else had to make us, right? Claire sat down across from him, her eyes searching his face. Yes, she said gently. You had birth parents. A mother and father who brought you into the world. But they couldn't take care of you. So they left you in a place where someone might find you. And we did. Lily, who had been quiet all morning, finally spoke. Why didn't they keep us? No one answered at first. The only sound was the soft ticking of the kitchen clock.
Matthew broke the silence. We don't know.
But we believe, they were scared. Maybe they didn't have what they needed. Maybe they thought you'd be better off somewhere else. Did they know we were blind? Lily asked. Yes, Claire said quietly. Hope's spoon clattered against her bowl. So they left because we're broken. No, Matthew said firmly.
You are not broken.
Claire reached for Hope's hand. They didn't leave because of who you are. They left because of who they weren't ready to be. Noah turned his face slightly toward the window, where the morning sun warmed the wooden floorboards. Do you think they ever think about us?
I hope so, Claire whispered.
After that morning, a new layer settled into the children's world. They still played, laughed and explored, but their conversations grew more introspective. They began recording voice diaries, a suggestion from Rachel, their mobility coach, to help express thoughts they found hard to say aloud. One night, Claire listened to one of Lily's recordings by accident, when checking the battery on the device.
My name is Lily. I like music and warm blanket and drain.
Sometimes I wonder what color my mother's hair was. I wonder if she had a soft voice.
I wonder if she cried when she left US.
Claire closed the device and cried quietly in the hallway. That same week, Noah asked for a notebook in Braille. He began writing his own letters, to a mother he had never met. Dear birth mom.
I don't know what you look like.
But I hope you are safe. I am safe too. I have a family. And even if I don't ever see you, I want you to know I forgive you. Hope took a different path. She acted out more. She grew frustrated when she couldn't run as fast as the neighbor kids. She argued when asked to use her cane. One afternoon she shouted, "Why should I try harder than everyone else just because I'm blind? Why didn't they love me enough to keep me?" Claire held her until her body stopped shaking, her small fists clenched against her chest. "You are loved now," Claire whispered. "And you've always been worth loving. Your story didn't start with being left. It started with being found." Later in private, Matthew said, "We can't shield them forever." "I don't want to shield them," Claire replied. "I want to equip them." And so they began to introduce their children to the concept of complexity. That love and abandonment could exist in the same story. That forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. That identity was both inherited and chosen. They read them stories about adopted children. They showed them photos of families who didn't look alike. They taught them to ask questions, of themselves, of the world, and to sit with answers that might never fully satisfy. One evening, after dinner, the children sat quietly around the fireplace. Claire handed each of them a small wooden token Matthew had carved. On one side was their name. On the other, a single word. For Noah, wisdom. For Lily, voice. For Hope, fire. "These are for when you feel lost," Claire said. "Because sometimes the world will try to tell you that you're missing something. But I see you. I know you. And you are complete." Hope turned her token over in her hands. "Fire," she said aloud, as if testing the word. "Yes," Claire said. "You burn so brightly." Lily whispered, voice. Noah traced the letters of his word and smiled. Wisdom. They didn't ask any more questions that night. They just sat, hands folded around their names. The questions didn't fade with time. If anything, they matured. They deepened. By the time Noah, Lily, and Hope turned 10, the need to know had shifted from an ache to a quiet, determined pursuit. No longer content with wondering aloud in voice diaries or whispering curiosities during bedtime, they began asking their parents the unspoken. Could they go back? Back to where it all started. Back to the doorstep. Back to the town no one spoke of, but everyone remembered. It was Noah who said it first, one autumn afternoon as they walked along the gravel road with Matthew. I want to see it. The place we were left. Matthew paused, unsure how to answer. His instinct, always protective, was to hesitate. But then he looked down at his son, who stood taller now, cane in hand, posture straight. Noah had never once asked for anything he didn't need. This was not a whim. Claire and Matthew discussed it that night by the fireplace, as the wind whispered against the windows. They need closure, Claire said. What if there's nothing there? Matthew replied. What if it just hurts them more? Claire stirred her tea and looked into the fire. Then at least it's our hurt. Shared. Named. Not some phantom pain they carry in silence. So they planned the trip. They didn't know where exactly the children had come from. But they knew where they'd been found, at the front porch of a now-abandoned community chapel in Brookhaven, 15 miles east of the farmhouse. Back then, the chapel had been part of a small independent ministry, now long defunct. The building had stood untouched for nearly a decade, weathered by time and neglect. When they arrived, the day was gray, the sky overcast as if the world itself understood the reverence of the moment. The children stood in front of the chapel, their hands trailing along the rotting wooden railing, listening to the wind, the distant hum of cars on the highway, the rustle of leaves. This is where we were? Hope asked. Claire nodded, her voice gentle. Right here. Under the awning. It was raining that night. Hard. Noah knelt, running his fingers along the porch floor, as if trying to touch history itself. Lily stood very still, her face turned upward. It smells like pine and dust, she said. But also, something else. Memory, Noah whispered. Matthew stepped forward and handed them each a small envelope. Inside were copies of the only note ever found with them. The ink had long faded, but the words had been transcribed clearly on clean paper. Please save them. We can't. They are blind. But they deserve to live. The children read it in silence, their fingers tracing the words over and over. Do you think they watched us be found? Lily asked. Were they hiding, waiting? We don't know, Claire said honestly. But I hope so. They sat on the chapel steps for a long time, not talking, just listening, to the wind, the birds, their own breathing. When they finally stood to leave, Hope turned and said, I'm not sad. I thought I would be. Me neither, Lily added. It feels like standing at the beginning. Claire's heart ached with love and something else, awe. Her children were not just resilient. They were brave. The following week, back home, Emily Walsh, the caseworker who had helped with their adoption years before, called Claire. You said you wanted to find out more, Emily said. I might have something. Apparently, after the story about the Robinsons circulated years ago, someone had sent in an anonymous letter to Child Services. It had never been followed up properly, no return address, no name. But inside was a clue, a mention of a women's clinic on the edge of Cincinnati, long closed down due to funding issues. It had operated quietly for years, mostly serving uninsured women. One name surfaced in old staff records. Angela Miller. Claire and Matthew didn't tell the children immediately. They waited, gathered what little they could find. Angela had once been a patient. She had given birth to triplets in that clinic. Records were scarce, but the dates lined up. She disappeared shortly after. Noah sat quietly as Claire explained what they knew. She might be your birth mother, Claire said, her voice steady but soft. We don't know for sure. But it's a lead. Can we meet her? Lily asked. We can try, Matthew replied. But we don't know how she'll respond. She may not want to talk. She may not be ready. Hope folded her arms. But we're ready. They made the call. Angela Miller lived alone on the outskirts of Cincinnati in a small rented apartment above a laundromat. She was in her 40s now, working part-time at a diner. When Claire contacted her, Angela's voice shook on the phone. "You said 3?" she asked. "Yes," Claire answered. There was silence. "Tell them I'm sorry," Angela whispered. "But I can't." Claire didn't push. She thanked her and hung up. But 2 days later, Angela called back. "I've changed my mind," she said. "I'll meet them. Just once." They made the drive quietly. No music, no chatter, just anticipation and a trembling hope. When they arrived, Angela was already waiting outside. Her eyes were red. Her hands trembled. When the children stepped out of the car, they didn't rush her. They stood, canes in hand, heads tilted toward her like flowers toward light. "I'm Angela," she said. I think I'm your mother." No one spoke. Finally, Lily stepped forward. "We didn't come to blame you," she said. "We just wanted to hear your voice." Angela collapsed into tears. "I was 20. Alone. I didn't know how to raise one child, let alone 3. And when the doctors told me you were all blind, I broke. I was ashamed. I didn't think I could do it. So I ran." Noah reached out slowly. Angela took his hand. "I forgive you," he said. Angela looked at each of them, sobbing. "You're not angry?" Hope answered. "We were. But we've had love. And you gave us life. We came to tell you we're okay." Angela nodded. "You deserve the world." Lily whispered, "We have it." And for the first time in years, something that had been broken found a thread to mend. The apartment above the laundromat was modest, a narrow hallway leading to a small living room furnished with 2 worn-out armchairs, a coffee table cluttered with unopened mail, and a couch that looked older than any of the people in the room. The curtains were drawn, filtering in just enough afternoon light to cast long shadows on the carpet. It was a quiet, almost timid space, as if uncertain of the encounter taking place inside it. Angela Miller sat across from the children, her hands gripping a chipped mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her shoulders were hunched, her body rigid with tension. She looked much older than her age, not because of time, but because of guilt, the kind that bends the spine and dulls the eyes. Noah, Lily, and Hope sat side by side on the couch, their hands resting in their laps or lightly touching the upholstery, grounding themselves. Matthew and Claire stood quietly in the corner, near the door, not intervening, not leading, just holding space. Angela cleared her throat. "I don't know where to start," she said. No one rushed her. Finally, she spoke again. "I was 20 when I found out I was pregnant. No job, no partner, no money. My family had already shut me out because I made mistakes." She looked down at her tea. "I thought I was having one baby. The doctor told me about the triplets halfway through. And then later, he said there were complications. That all 3 of you were likely blind. He said I needed to prepare for a very difficult life." Hope's brow furrowed. "And that's why you gave us away?" Angela nodded slowly. "I didn't think I could handle it. I wasn't strong. I was scared. And ashamed. There was a clinic that agreed to let me deliver there quietly. No records. No questions. I left 2 days later." She paused, her voice trembling. "I thought someone else could love you better. But I didn't stay to find out." Lily's voice was soft but steady. "Why didn't you come back? Even once?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. "Because every year that passed, I thought you'd hate me more. And I hated myself more too. I convinced myself that no news meant you were okay. That maybe someone had taken you in." "We were," Noah said. "Taken in, I mean. By people who love us. Who raised us." Angela looked up, her expression breaking with relief and sorrow all at once. "I prayed for that. Every night. But I never thought I'd see you again." Hope leaned slightly forward. "Did you ever name us?" Angela hesitated, then nodded. "I called you Sam, Grace, and Joy. Just in my head. I didn't put anything on paper. I was afraid if I did, it would make it real." Lily pressed her hand to her heart. "We have new names now. But I think it's okay to remember the first ones too." Angela smiled through her tears. "I would like that." There was a long pause, filled only by the soft whir of the ceiling fan and the distant hum of washing machines downstairs. Then Noah spoke again. "We didn't come for an apology. Or to make you feel bad. We came because we needed to see for ourselves. To hear your voice." Angela nodded. "And I needed to hear yours. Even if I didn't know it." Claire finally stepped forward, her voice gentle but clear. "They've always known love. But knowing the truth, it helps fill in the empty spaces." Angela looked at her and Matthew. "You raised them. You gave them everything I couldn't." Matthew shook his head. "They gave us more." Angela's eyes turned to the children once more. "I know I don't have a right to ask for anything. But I hope you'll let me know you. Even just a little." Lily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "We wrote you a letter." Angela's hands shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting was careful, clearly guided by a stylus or typewriter. The words were short, but each sentence bore the weight of intention. "Dear Angela, we don't know what your life has been like since that day. But we wanted you to know about ours. We have a garden. We have music. We have each other. We hope you have peace. From Noah, Lily, and Hope." Angela clutched the paper to her chest, a sob escaping her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't deserve this grace, but I will treasure it." After that, things moved slowly. There were no dramatic hugs, no declarations of reconciliation. But there was presence. And in that presence, something sacred began to form. They spent the next hour sharing small things, favorite foods, what their voices sounded like when they laughed, stories of childhood mischief. Angela showed them an old photo of herself at 20, holding her stomach, eyes scared and hopeful at once. "You look like me," Hope said. Angela chuckled softly. "You all do." When it was time to leave, Angela walked them to the stairwell. Her voice cracked as she said goodbye. "I don't know if you'll come back. And I won't ask. But you gave me something today I never thought I'd have." "What's that?" Lily asked. Angela smiled. "A second chance to forgive myself." Noah held out his hand. Angela took it. "Goodbye, Noah." He nodded. "Not goodbye. Just goodbye for now." And then they were gone, descending the stairs slowly, the cane taps echoing like a soft rhythm of healing. Back in the car, no one spoke right away. The silence wasn't heavy. It was whole. Finally, Hope whispered, "I thought I'd be angry. But I'm not." "Me neither," Lily said. Noah looked out the window and said, "I think sometimes, seeing someone's pain helps you understand your own." Claire reached back and held their hands, one by one. "You were never just left," she said. "You were always found." Adolescence arrived not with rebellion, but with revelation. By 13, each of the children had begun shaping their identities, not only as individuals who were blind, not only as adoptees with complex origins, but as young people brimming with ambition, passion, and a quiet fire. It was Claire who noticed it first, a shift in the air, in their posture, in the way they began to move through the house with more confidence, as if they had outgrown its familiarity and were reaching for something just beyond its walls. "They're stretching," she told Matthew one evening as they watched the children work independently in the living room. Noah was at the Braille typewriter, his fingers flying across the keys. He'd taken to writing short stories, most of them rich in sound and sensation, often centering on characters who solved mysteries using intuition, scent, and rhythm instead of sight. Lily sat with headphones on, humming softly as she arranged audio clips for a podcast she had started on her own, a series called Echoes from the Inside, where she explored what it meant to be blind in a world built for eyes. Hope, ever kinetic, had taken up track and field through a local Paralympic club. She practiced twice a week, running tethered to her guide, a high school senior named Maya. The speed came naturally. The control took work. But more than anything, Hope loved the feeling of wind on her face, of motion without fear. Each of them, in their own way, was becoming their own light. Still, adolescence came with questions of identity that even the most supportive home could not fully answer. One evening, Noah approached Claire with a question that felt more adult than any before. "Mom," he said, "do you think I'll ever be seen for who I am? Not just for what I am?" Claire paused, not quite sure what he meant. "You mean, as a person who's blind?" "I mean as someone who wants to be a writer. A thinker. Someone who has ideas that aren't always about being blind. Claire nodded slowly. Yes. I think you already are. But the world doesn't always see that, he said. Sometimes it only sees what's missing. Claire sighed. That's true. But the world is also changing. And part of how it changes is through people like you, people who refuse to be defined by absence. Noah smiled, not because he felt reassured, but because he felt understood. Meanwhile, Lily had begun corresponding with a musician in New York, a blind pianist who had once been featured on a documentary about adaptive music education. Claire had sent a recording of Lily's voice to the program, and to their surprise, the artist, Marcus Dyer, had written back. His first message was simple. Your voice is honest. Don't stop using it. From that point on, Lily began dreaming beyond the farmhouse, beyond Kentucky. She started working on compositions, blending music, spoken word, and ambient sound, that told stories in layers, designed not just to be heard but felt. One of her first pieces was titled Porchlight, a haunting melody interwoven with soft footsteps, rainfall, and the creak of a wooden floor. It was a tribute to the night she had been found. When Claire first heard it, she wept. Hope's growth, as always, came with bursts of brilliance and waves of intensity. She was the first to rebel, not out of defiance but out of hunger, for more freedom, for more control, for proof that she could stand without assistance. I don't need a guide every time, she said one day after tripping over a curb. I just need space. Matthew crouched beside her. You're not being held back. You're being prepared. But prepared for what? She snapped. To always be the girl who almost keeps up? You're not almost anything, he said gently. You're already more than you know. And she was. Hope's first race ended in a fall. Her second in a fifth-place finish. Her third, a regional event with a larger crowd than she'd ever known, ended in silence. But her fourth race, she won. And when the announcer said her name into the mic, Hope Robinson, gold medalist, she didn't cry. She just nodded, calm and solid, as if to say, I knew I would. In the months that followed, the children's world expanded. They attended a summer program for visually impaired youth in Nashville, where they met others like themselves, kids with similar challenges, but also different backgrounds, different dreams. They returned energized, filled with new ideas. Noah began organizing local braille writing workshops for kids in nearby schools. Lily submitted her audio pieces to an online youth arts festival and was invited to speak virtually on a panel about accessibility in the arts. Hope joined a mentorship program and began helping younger children who were newly diagnosed with visual impairments. They look up to me, she told Claire one day, slightly bewildered. They should, Claire replied. Through it all, their bond as siblings deepened. They teased each other, supported each other, argued occasionally, but always came back to center. One evening, sitting on the porch under a velvet sky, Lily asked, Do you think we'll always live together? I hope not, Hope said quickly. I want to see the world. We already do, Noah joked. They all laughed. But seriously, Lily said, do you think we'll be okay if we're apart? Noah leaned back in his chair. I think we'll always find each other, even without seeing.
Claire, listening from the kitchen, smiled.
It was a line she would later write down in her journal. A quiet prophecy from a boy who had always known more than he said. That night, as they went to bed, Claire tucked them in like she had done since they were babies. They were taller now, almost young adults, but they still let her. Good night, my loves, she said. And in unison they replied, We are the light. It started with a video. Lily had recorded one of her soundscape pieces for her podcast, a layered composition titled Window Without Glass. It featured her voice narrating reflections on identity, interwoven with soft piano notes, distant laughter, the hush of wind through trees, and the rhythmic tapping of her cane on gravel. Claire uploaded it to a youth arts contest online, not thinking much of it. 2 weeks later, the clip had over 200,000 views. By the end of the month, it had surpassed 1 million. People weren't just watching, they were sharing.
Commenting.
Asking questions. Teachers wrote in from across the country, saying they'd used the piece in classrooms to talk about inclusion. Parents of blind children reached out, thanking Lily for articulating what their kids hadn't found the words for yet. Suddenly, the Robinsons found themselves in the center of something larger than their small farmhouse life. One morning, Claire opened her email to find an invitation.
Dear MS, Robinson.
We would be honored to host your daughter Lily as a speaker at our National Youth Arts Symposium in Washington, D.C. Please let us know if she would be available.
National Art for Inclusion Foundation. Claire reads the message 3 times, tears blurring her vision.
When she told Lily, the girl simply said, I guess people are starting to listen.
The invitation marquait a shift.
Not just for Lily, but for all three of them. Noah began receiving letters in Braille from other young writers, kids who had heard of him through local literacy programs and wanted feedback, encouragement, even friendship. He took time each week to reply to every single one. It matters that they feel heard, he told Claire. We all deserve that. Hope was invited to speak at her sports club's annual fundraising dinner. She stood at the podium, gold medal on her neck, and said, running blind means running with trust. You trust the person beside you, the ground beneath you, and your own courage to keep going even when you can't see where it leads. After her speech, a parent came up and said, I used to be afraid for my daughter. Now I'm just proud.
The Robinson children weren't seeking fame.
They weren't chasing a spotlight. But the world was turning toward them anyway, not out of pity, but because people recognized something true in their voices. One afternoon, a reporter from a national magazine visited the farmhouse. She was soft-spoken and attentive, and she asked permission before taking any notes. What would you say, she asked Noah during their interview, to someone who thinks your blindness limits your potential? Noah paused thoughtfully. I'd say we all have something we can't do. But if you stop at that, you miss what we can do. Lily added, it's not about pretending we're the same. It's about realizing different isn't less. Hope smiled. And sometimes different is stronger. The article went viral. The title read, The Family That Saw Without Eyes, How 3 Siblings Are Changing the Way We Understand Ability. With attention came invitations, television interviews, conferences, panels. But Matthew and Claire were careful. They said no far more often than they said yes. Not because they wanted to hide, but because they wanted to protect what was real. They're still kids, Matthew reminded one producer who pushed for an exclusive interview.
Brilliant kids. Brave kids.
But kids all the same. And at home, the children remained grounded. They still did chores. Still argued over who got the last cookie. Still laughed at bad jokes and helped in the garden and listened to music until they fell asleep. But they also started dreaming bigger. Noah applied for a summer writing fellowship in Vermont. He was accepted, the first visually impaired applicant in the program's history. Lily began composing a full-length audio album about their journey, titling it Born from Rain, a tribute to the stormy night they arrived at Claire and Matthew's doorstep. Hope started training for the Junior Paralympics. She ran harder, fell harder, and got up faster than ever. Their story, once confined to a farmhouse porch, now moved through cities and airwaves, reaching people who had never imagined what it meant to live with sightlessness, and what it meant to thrive through it. But not everyone understood. Some of the online attention came with skepticism. There were comments like, this is inspirational, but unrealistic.
Most blind qui scannent d'Odis.
Their parents must be forcing them to perform. They're just exceptions, not the rule. When Claire showed the children, asking whether they wanted to respond, they surprised her.
Let it be, Noah said.
You can't teach someone who doesn't want to learn. But we'll keep speaking, Lily added.
For the ones who do want to.
And they did. They began visiting schools, not to perform, but to connect. They talked about access, technology, and the importance of designing a world that included everyone from the start. Hope gave a demonstration of how her guide and she communicated during a race. When a boy in the back asked, "Isn't it hard not being able to see the finish line?" she grinned and said, "That's the best part, I don't need to see it to cross it." After one visit, a teacher pulled Claire aside, teary-eyed. "I've taught here for 20 years, she said. And today, for the first time, my students didn't talk about disability. They talked about strength." Back at the farmhouse one evening, Matthew stood on the porch, watching the children, now young teens, sit together under the old tree. They were laughing, sharing stories, the kind of laughter that comes only from knowing exactly where you belong. Claire stepped beside him. "Do you think they'll outgrow us?" she asked. "No," he said, shaking his head. "They'll grow from us." He looked at her. And then they'll light the way for others. That night, as the sun disappeared behind the hills and the fireflies blinked their soft signals across the yard, the Robinson home glowed from within, not from electricity, but from something stronger. A family. A truth. A light that the world could finally see. It had been years. Years since the storm. Years since the porch light flickered into their lives like a quiet beacon. Years since 3 tiny sightless infants were placed in a basket at the edge of the world, and found not by accident, but by fate. Now, they were home again. Noah, Lily, and Hope stood outside the Robinson farmhouse, their adult frames silhouetted against the fading Kentucky sky. The gravel crunched softly beneath their shoes, and the wind, still familiar, wrapped around them like an old friend. Claire opened the front door, her smile audible before it was visible. "There you are," she said, tears already in her voice. Matthew stood behind her, older now, hair grayer, but eyes bright. "You made it," he added simply. Noah stepped forward first, his cane tapping lightly as he found the porch step, the same place he had been laid down as a baby, swaddled in cloth and left with nothing but silence. "I had to touch it again," he said. "The wood. The place where everything began." Lily followed, her fingers brushing the railing, the texture unchanged.
"I recorded the sound of these portions," she whispered. "I never told you. I listened to it when I need to remember where I come from."
Hope didn't say anything at first. She just climbed the step, turned around slowly, and took in the vastness of the hills. "This is still the only place where I sleep deeply," she finally said. "Because here, I don't have to run to prove anything." Inside, the house had changed only slightly. The furniture was softer now, more worn. The piano still stood in the corner, dusted and tuned. The shelves were lined with braille books and framed photos. The fireplace crackled with a low, steady warmth. They gathered around the kitchen table, the same table where Claire had once spoon-fed them, where Matthew had read bedtime stories, where Lily had hummed lullabies before knowing what melody even meant. "Do you remember," Claire said, "how you each named this room differently?" Noah chuckled. "I called it the warm room. Because of the way it smelled after dinner." Lily nodded. "I called it the laugh room. Because someone was always laughing here." Hope smirked. "I called it the mess room. Because someone was always making one." They laughed together, the sound rich and full, echoing softly in the corners of the house. Later that night, after dinner and stories and the quiet kind of silence only a well-loved family can sit comfortably in, Matthew brought out 3 small boxes. He placed them on the table. "We've had these for a while," he said. "We were waiting for the right moment." Noah opened his first. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, embossed with his name in braille. "It's yours," Matthew said, "to write your first book. You've already written hundreds of pages, but this one is for your story." Noah nodded slowly, his fingers trembling as they traced the spine. Lily's box contained a vintage microphone, sleek and silver, attached to a small wooden plaque that read, "Your voice changed more than sound. It changed hearts." She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Hope's box was heavier. Inside was her first pair of racing shoes, worn and frayed, mounted on a base made of oak, with a brass plate beneath. "For every time you ran where others only dared to walk." Hope touched the shoes, then looked at Matthew and Claire. "You never told me you kept these." Matthew smiled. "We kept everything." There was silence again, not the kind that fills awkward spaces, but the kind that signals peace. Completion. Homecoming. That night, they slept in their old rooms. The beds had been changed, the quilts updated, but the ceilings still whispered the same quiet comfort. Noah wrote long into the night, capturing thoughts he hadn't been ready to speak until now. Lily lay with her headphones on, but not listening, just imagining. Her fingers twitched occasionally, composing music only she could hear. Hope woke before dawn, walked barefoot to the porch, and stood there until the sun broke the horizon. The next morning, as they prepared to leave again, back to their lives, their missions, their callings, Claire asked the question she had been holding back. Was it enough? They turned, all 3, in perfect rhythm. Noah answered first. "It wasn't enough. It was everything." Lily added, "You didn't give us sight. You gave us vision." Hope finished, "You didn't save us. You saw us." Claire cried then. Not the broken sobs of pain, but the gentle tears of a heart that had been filled, slowly, steadily, and finally to the brim. Before they left, each of them returned once more to the place on the porch where they had first arrived. Noah knelt and laid his notebook on the wood for a moment, as if offering it to the earth. Lily pressed her palm flat to the floorboards and whispered a note, a sound so soft, it belonged only to memory. Hope crouched down and said, "Thank you for letting me grow here." Matthew stood beside Claire, his arm around her waist. "They'll always come back," he said. Claire nodded. "Because they were never lost." As the car pulled away down the gravel road, Claire and Matthew watched from the porch, the same porch that had once been the site of heartbreak, of uncertainty, of impossible decisions. Now, it was only sacred. And even after the taillights disappeared behind the hills, they stood a moment longer, letting the wind carry their gratitude into the world. Because home wasn't where they had started. It was where they had been chosen. It was where they had returned. It was where they would always belong.